pro wrestling has this interest in making weird decisions. The booker always has their preference and favorites, even at the detriment of the show, and more often than not, they make decisions that are questionable. It's strange because they themselves know about the show better than the fans and have a better sense of how to go about things. Yet time after time, they do something out of the blue and something that everyone knows isn't a good idea. Title reigns are simple to see, but often what works doesn't draw. It's a weird business. Stone Cold might emerge as the biggest star, and Shawn Michaels, on the other hand, might be a big bust when it comes to the ratings. But these title reigns are some that absolutely nobody in their right mind asked for except the wrestler themselves. I will say, though, at the same time, that some of these reigns weren't exactly bad, it's just nobody asked for them. The Attitude Era was in full swing by 1999. The momentum the WWF had at the time was absolutely ridiculous and something that was never seen before. The fundamentals were there, everything was in place for them to take over the business. However, the mid-card scene had a lot of issues. These weren't that big problems, of course, but when watching the shows, you can't help but notice that there's some decisions that are dumb and strange. The Road Dogg had done well for himself as a wrestler in the hardcore scene. He had some entertaining matches with the likes of Al Snow and Hardcore Holly, and it opened way for him to do more and show variety. This is something that was nice enough. Heading into WrestleMania, Road Dogg was feuding with Al Snow and Hardcore Holly. Vince Russo decides to swap him and make him the Intercontinental Champion. Why? Because there was no reason for him to be involved in a feud that was not even about the title. It was about Ryan Shamrock. This wasn't hard to understand, but apparently Swerve Bro was interesting, which leads me to Billy Gunn. Billy Gunn found himself in a similar situation. He was doing more outside of the tag team. Now, I'ma say it, Billy Gunn is one of my favorite mid-carders from the Attitude Era. He wasn't world-class in-ring, but I was always entertained by him. His selling was great, and he had a strong understanding of the basics. That thing alone made you one of the better wrestlers in this era. At the time, he was involved in that Ryan Shamrock storyline, which also involved the Intercontinental Championship. And considering everything, it made sense to continue with the storyline, right? Yeah, about that. He won the Hardcore Championship, and when WrestleMania came around, both men looked so out of place in their stories because it wasn't even their stories. This was a weird switch that didn't really help anybody. Maybe the Road Dogg because the Intercontinental Championship is always nice to have in your name, but in general, it just wasn't a good thing, you know? Like, at the end of the day, they swapped stories, they ruined their own stories, and in turn, the matches probably took a bit of a downgrade due to the story not making sense because the champions weren't really involved with it. Vince McMahon was one of the most important characters of the Attitude Era. His influence on the shows were huge and a big reason as to why the tides turned in the Monday Night Wars. McMahon's heel character brought a grounded and compelling arc with Stone Cold constantly running into hurdle after hurdle in his road to the WWF Championship. As always, the product needed to move on and evolve, and McMahon was well aware of this. And this is one of the good things about the Attitude Era. They actually understood as time went on that things weren't supposed to stay the same. That's why the main event scene changed very often, even though there was the same names. He turned face and feuded with the Game Triple H. Triple H's massive ego was becoming a problem for the entire roster, and the boss felt he should be the one to stop him, seeing as he was constantly calling him out and trying to assert his dominance. He's provoking his family and threatening everyone in his way. This led to a title match between the Game and the Boss. It was on SmackDown, and since it was the Attitude Era, McMahon won the title. It came from out of nowhere and showed that SmackDown was the new show to watch. But then you realize McMahon won the most important title in the entire company, a title reserved for a select few, the best to the best, and he wasn't the best wrestler, let alone a wrestler, so it's like, why the hell is he champion? So in many ways, it devalued the title, a title that was already being passed around more than a joint, and he relinquished it later that week only for Triple H to win it back at Unforgiven. This was wild and showed that WWF in 1999 was in another planet doing all these title changes for the sake of it. It was random. David Arquette in WCW was bizarre. This one is straight up. I don't even need to bring an introduction here. David Arquette just was bizarre. He came in and they made him world champion. The world heavyweight champion. He was winning the title in a time where they needed to work on their presentation, booking, everything. This was dumb and only made things worse for them at the time. We all know it's common knowledge, but at least Arquette had some value to his name. What value did Vince Russo bring to the show? So at the time, Vince Russo was a big character on WCW. He had a lot of in-the-know jokes, such as this tag team called Creative Control. He wasn't really thinking about the simple picture, which is creating a show for the fans that were watching on TV and not on the internet. It was all about the shock factor. What he forgot was that the shock has to make sense and bring attention. It's like throwing Hail Marys for the sake of it or a long ball. Nothing is going to happen. At one point he was feuding with Booker T. He wanted to take the title away from him. He did just that but ended up becoming champion himself. I don't like using the word, but this was a mark moment. I just don't see how it makes sense to make him champion. Imagine Tony Khan became champion. That's what this is. He's barely a character of the show, let alone a draw. He only drew blanks and this benefited nobody. Not even himself except for the name. I might become a booker myself and find a way to become champion. Who knows? I don't know what it is with the bookers, but when they lose their touch, it's almost impossible for them to win it back. There's a lot of title reigns from that time that could be talked about, but we're not going to do it here. We're going to make a whole entire WCW 2000 video. That's what you guys want. Big Show's time in the WWE was weird. He was pushed one moment and the next, he was a jobber. This was something that happened a lot and it meant that the audience couldn't take him serious. His 2001 started off hot with the return, but after that, he was an afterthought and considered a failure. He went down to OVW on 2 occasions and even then, they couldn't believe in him. His heel turn and NWO joining was nothing, and it was was only an additional member. He was seen as somebody that had the special quality of being a big man, and that worked into his favor with Paul Heyman taking over. Heyman often saw big guys as a strong way to create stories, and with him on SmackDown, it was no different. He was basically the guy to go to if he had untapped potential. Big Show was immediately pushed as a huge opponent. He took out The Undertaker and went after the WWE Champion. This was a story with Brock Lesnar being fearless and ready to challenge anybody that came in his way, even if they were the toughest challenge. From out of nowhere, he lost to the Big Show. It was one of the most shocking title wins at the time because of Big Show's reputation. It was so random. Unlike the people in here though, this wasn't terrible and did a lot for him, as he was seen as a huge threat in the future. Without this title reign, a lot about the Big Show would be different. It caused a resurgence in his career and became a strongly booked giant throughout the next year, so it worked well for him. You know, it was good. Jeff Jarrett was always a good hand. He was never the best, but in terms of ability, he could do what a lot of others could do on a smaller scale. This was well known in WWF, but going to WCW seemed to change that. He was pushed more as a main event talent because Vince Russo liked him a lot. They made him look like he was on the level of Sting and Goldberg, which is crazy. This followed him into TNA, where he was running things. TNA was the only US promotion around. His father made a new company, and it was basically his playground. Jarrett had a couple of title reigns early on, but it was clear that he was positioning himself as the face of the company when he shouldn't be. It's obviously his promotion. He could do whatever he wanted, but this was a problem. It was halting others' momentum and making himself champion for the sake of it. It was dumb and only hurt the company because it meant no matter what happened, it was always going to be Jeff Jarrett's title. The most frustrating one was the King of the Mountain match in 2006. At this point, the fans were fed up with him. They just didn't care. He was getting booed, but not in a good way. Jarrett was just not the guy, and it was the wrong kind of heat to have as a wrestler. But they didn't care, and in turn, TNA wasn't getting that interesting. It took Christian's debut and Kurt Angle's to switch things up. Jarrett's title reigns are a prime example of what not to do. A lot could have happened if he wasn't winning all the time and having those long runs. Obviously, he was going to win the title a couple of times, with the way they did it, the booing, the heat. It wasn't the good kind of heat. 2007 was a very tough year for professional wrestling. There was a lot of controversies happening throughout the year, and it was a time where many thought wrestling wouldn't survive. The reasons were because of the Chris Benoit thing and the deaths of many wrestlers that year. On screen, WWE and TNA had a lot of issues to deal with. WWE in particular was hit with injuries to his top talent. The Undertaker, Edge, and Mr. Kennedy were supposed to hold the World Heavyweight Championship at the time. This caused a lot of issues with the WWE scrambling to find the next guy to take the title after Edge's injury. He was supposed to hold the title for a long time and have a long reign that was going to go through the summer, but those plans were scrapped after he tore his shoulder and found himself sidelined for 4 months. A battle royal was booked to determine the next champion, and there was a couple of choices: Kane, Batista, Mark Henry. On Raw, King Booker was an option, but instead they chose the Great Khali. This was a huge shocker, and everything about it was so bad. What made it so bad was that Khali couldn't wrestle comfortably, let alone have a good match. There needed to be a lot of smoke and mirrors with his matches to even make it decent. That's the issue, and to me, there was a lot of better options on the roster, even though it was lighter. Hell, Ric Flair winning his 17th title would have made for a better story, not to mention the biggest challenger for the title at the time was Batista. That was a big story they could do where Flair gets one over, gets more confident, and plays the role of a heel again for a couple of weeks. Kane was Edge's rival at the time in a dangerous threat and storyline. Mark Henry never got to finish his story with Batista. Why not crash his party and take his title to continue the feud? I don't know why they didn't do all of this. Great Khali is obviously legitimate as a champion. We're gonna say that right now. It's clear as day. He's a big guy. He's got the stature. He's got the size, all that. But he wasn't going to be fit to hold the title, you know? At least they tried it here instead of doing it a while later when there was a more stacked roster, so there's that. WWE really changed in 2007 in many ways, from top to bottom, from the important stuff to some very minor things. It was all about change that year, even though they never intended for that in the beginning of the year. The Cruiserweight division deteriorated to a point where it became an afterthought. What was once a bright and exciting idea to bring the WWE's smallest wrestlers under a division was now under danger of being completely replaced. 2005 felt like a time where they stopped caring much about it. Gregory Helms was by far one of the very best champions, but that's only because his status was elevated in other stories, so in some ways, it does make the title look better, but in others, it also shows how much of an afterthought it is that he goes weeks and weeks without defending the title. 2007 was basically the end, and WWE made no mistakes in letting everyone know that the title was done with Hornswoggle. Hornswoggle won the title in a Cruiserweight Open, which nobody even considered him as a favorite because he wasn't even in it. He didn't really defend the title all that much and ended up holding the title around like a prop. Even in the big story with him being the illegitimate son, he didn't even bring the title around, nor was he mentioned much as a Cruiserweight champion. Nobody asked for Hornswoggle as champion, but then again, at this point, nobody even cared about this title. WWE didn't put much effort into rebuilding the Cruiserweight division, and the fans reciprocated the energy. You can name some of the notable Cruiserweight matches in the last 2 years by your hand. It wasn't notable at all. The title ended with Hornswoggle letting go and relinquishing the title, making him the final holder of the belt. It's unfortunate that the title ended like that, but it really makes sense when you see how WWE treated it at the time. It just wasn't going to be prioritized and return to prominence. That was never going to happen. Bret Hart was always going to eventually return to WWE. It didn't seem possible at the time because of the heat between them, but Hart always focused on his legacy and the importance of preserving it, even if it meant he had to mend things with his biggest enemy. If Hart had it his way, he probably would have came back in 2002 and closed out his career on a high. Talks of a return had been going on since that time period, but it wasn't until 2005 that he actually showed up in some way. It was his own DVD. Bret, though, didn't officially come back until 2010. It was a huge moment in Raw history and showed that anything can happen in the WWE. He cleared things with Shawn Michaels, finished his story with Vince, and was off to becoming a regular member of the show. Sometime later, he had a feud with The Miz, who was the United States champion. That title is synonymous with Bret Hart, and as much as he hates his WCW run, he's still considered one of the greatest US champions in history. A man who represented everything that the title should be about. In a surprise turn of events, he actually won the title again at the age of 53. This is a weird moment. Nobody literally asked for it, but I'm sure the Hitman had some satisfaction holding a title again. This did halt some of Miz's momentum because he was holding 3 titles and started holding none after this. Hart obviously couldn't wrestle much, he couldn't bump, he couldn't sell, so it's a strange one to think about. Dolph Ziggler had shown a lot of potential in his early days. It wasn't as much as he'd show a bit later on. There was clearly something there with him. He just needed more experience and more time in the mid-card to show more potential. He wasn't the brightest talent at the time, but he won over a lot of people by the end of 2010. I don't know if the deal involved 100 matches with Kofi Kingston, but one thing for sure is that there was a big difference for him from the beginning of the year to the end. As always, this comes with a test run. He was allowed to run with the rated R superstar at the very top for SmackDown's most coveted title. Ziggler passed with flying colors, but there was always something going against him. His selling was too good for somebody trying to be a main eventer. It's one of those things that many, including me, feel that held him back. He was so good at making others look good that he kind of forgets himself. But WWE had a great idea of giving him the World Championship, stripping Edge of the title. This was stupid and didn't serve anybody except Edge because a world title is supposed to be won. He got a title handed to him, and it wasn't even like Randy Orton in 2007 where he actually won the title before and took out John Cena the champion. It was because Edge got fired in storyline. I didn't like it because it felt so undeserving. You may as well handed the title to Drew McIntyre at the time. Same thing. A talent that wasn't ready to hold a title, especially a title of such importance, although WWE was starting to see it differently. Then he lost the title in his first title defense a couple of minutes later. Nobody even remembers his title reign. Dolph Ziggler himself probably doesn't even remember it. Yeah, it's a nice accomplishment for him. Hell, I'll take it. I'd want to be the World Heavyweight Champion. I'd want to have it in my name, even if it was for 5 seconds. I don't care if they made me champion because I found the title in a duffel bag. Who cares? It's the world title. But they really should have waited a bit for him to actually win the thing. Because a month later, he was in a mid-card feud with Snooki, dyed his hair to look like Evan Bourne, and the funniest part in all of this is that even though Ziggler was a personification of what a mid-carder was, he held the world title a month earlier, so it's funny. CM Punk's 2011 was a wild ride, the likes of we will never see again. He peaked like crazy. CM Punk in 2011 was the definition of a new era. The momentum he had that year was unseen. It hadn't been seen in a while. Certainly not in that era of WWE. I feel like they didn't appreciate the hype and excitement that the story brought. Obviously, CM Punk wasn't dropping the floor of the ratings or anything like that. You can go check the stats, but it was a really nice story that blurred the lines, not to mention gave the company one of its most unique stories ever. A frustrated wrestler leaving the company but making it his mission to claim the company's most important prize on his way out. It was nice and all, but not only did they return him so soon, but Alberto Del Rio crashed the summer and cashed in to put an end to the summer of Punk. It's not so much because of Del Rio cashing in, but at the time he cashed it in. He was bound to be champion eventually, but not only did this guy win the title once, he won it again a month later. This guy was basically an industry plant. I get. He came from a wrestling family, but how did this guy get away with 2 world title reigns? 1, yeah, we all knew it would happen, but 2, how? Honestly, even though he's not the most loved guy at the moment, I don't think he was one of the worst champions. Reigns-wise, as a title run, it wasn't the worst, but it just happened. There's not much to say about it other than, oh yeah, Alberto Del Rio was WWE champion twice. Like, we get it. Roman Reigns in 2015 was one of the funnest years I've seen for a main event wrestler. You could feel how desperate they were to get the crowd to like him. It's interesting and something I want to talk about in detail. But with that said, their efforts got them a story involving Roman refusing to join the Authority and become their golden boy. So they had Sheamus cash in the briefcase. Sheamus had just returned, and even though he won the briefcase, it kind of came from out of nowhere as well, so to see him become the WWE champion again was weird, because WWE at the time only had 1 world title. I'd compare it to Big Show's run in 1999, where it was not only transitional, but you were better off giving it to somebody else. Sheamus' run was dull, and coupled with the League of Nations, it was rough. The League of Nations was one of the most terrible factions due to how poorly handled it was. Roman was destroying them every week, and it was bound to end with him winning the title. Alright, this was where the video was supposed to end, but then I felt that it was incomplete. It's half the reason why I didn't release this for so long, because this video was actually recorded about a month ago. So I was like, hey, let's add to it, because it feels so incomplete. It feels like it's not enough. Alright, SmackDown after WrestleMania 33 was all over the place. The momentum the show had gained in the last 6 months was gone like that with the Superstar Shakeup. The Superstar Shakeup was basically a lighter version of the WWE Draft. SmackDown did keep its Wrestler of the Year AJ Styles, but they took The Miz, Dean Ambrose, and got Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn in return. The dynamics with The Miz and Ambrose really helped the show a lot, especially The Miz, who could be a great heel champion. Randy Orton's title reign was just beginning, and this was when WWE had the great idea to make Jinder Mahal the champion. WWE was breaking into India at the time and felt that leading with a champion from the country entry. Jinder was from Canada and India, so he was considered the best choice. It was the most shocking title win I've ever seen, probably, especially for a world championship, because this guy was a literal jobber. He wasn't a lower card guy, he was a jobber. This guy used to lose almost every match he was in, featured. He never even used to have an entrance because he comes out during commercial. You know, after commercial break, he's standing there and they put the nameplate Jinder Mahal, he's preparing whatever. That's what he was doing. You don't see this often. Jinder came from out of nowhere and suddenly became the leader of SmackDown. The biggest problem with this is that WWE didn't realize that the fans in India cared more about Roman Reigns and their top wrestlers. They overestimated the market and hyped up this title reign for months in anticipation for the India tour in December. Jinder had the presentation down. He looked amazing. However, everything else is a different story. It felt like he was holding the title hostage from the rest of SmackDown instead of being a title reign. The title reign should have been the Miz's at the time. I really think that it was a missed opportunity to have him on top during this era. I think he would have dealt with the pressure much better here. Jinder didn't even make it to the India tour as champion, and WWE was so regretful about this run that they made AJ Styles hold the title for a year. The funniest part in all of this is that Jinder didn't make it to the India tour, but he ended up bowing to Triple H in the year of 2017. But yeah, it was just a random title reign. Unlike JBL, Jinder didn't fit the role eventually, which is unfortunate, you know. I think that's what separates those two when you compare them, is that JBL in the beginning didn't feel like a world champion, but by the end of it, when he lost to John Cena, he actually fit the role. Jinder Mahal, I didn't feel that way at all. The moment he lost the title, you're like, oh yeah, back to how it was. Goldberg's return to WWE brought him closure to his career. It was a disappointing first year for him back in 2003, so to come back and actually get booked as he should fix the problems of his first run. This is all good and all, but he won the Universal Championship from Kevin Owens and basically derailed the whole story he had with Chris Jericho. His run peaked at WrestleMania 33 with a fast-paced, intense match with Brock Lesnar. Everything after, though, is a different story. He had the worst match of the year with The Undertaker at Super Showdown. It was a disgrace and almost a black stain on their later careers. It's a bit dramatic, but if you had to talk about their final years as wrestlers, this match has to be mentioned. As time went on, Goldberg did eventually return. The Fiend Bray Wyatt was champion. WWE had already booked themselves in a corner as usual. 2017 and 20 should be the booked in a corner years, where WWE always showed up and booked themselves in corners. It was funny. Here, Bray Wyatt was most likely going to walk into WrestleMania to face Roman Reigns for the title. Obviously, fan reception wasn't as bad for Roman as it was a couple of years earlier, but it was clear what was going to happen if the big dog emerged as champion at WrestleMania. I remember thinking this was going to be the main event of the show. I was a bit on the Fiend. I actually preferred Daniel Bryan versus Roman Reigns as the main event. He was a great character, but it was so complicated to have him wrestle for the title. Then Goldberg came along. I don't really remember my thoughts at the time, but it didn't seem like he'd win the title here. There was a possibility because the story was that Goldberg had zero fear in the face of the Fiend, which was unlike any of his previous opponents. Even Bryan by the end almost beat him, but still had that fear behind him. I really liked that story and almost wish it was somebody else in that position. Because if Bray Wyatt was losing at Super Showdown, I just like the idea of a confident good guy putting raps to him because Wyatt relied too much on the mental game to give him the victory. I almost left this part off the video because Goldberg was actually a rating draw for SmackDown at the time. He had some of the highest rated segments, so it kinda goes against the video, but then again, who in their right mind before the Royal Rumble thought, man, Goldberg should win that title? Nobody. It wasn't until he came along. But I kind of felt weird about this one. I did think about leaving it out, but I kept it in. Goldberg's run wasn't like all that. He obviously dropped it to Braun Strowman, not Roman Reigns, because it was a COVID WrestleMania, if you guys remember. It was a nothing reign, you know, it was transitional. He did his job, came in, came out, lost the title, all that. But it really gave Bray Wyatt a big hit at the time. I don't think he should have been champion at the time, but that's what happens when you book yourself in a corner. You know, something's got to give. So NWA's come along as a promotion once again. It always comes out, comes back in, whatnot. But around 2019, there was a full-fledged NWA show. The show had Nick Aldis as champion. He was a good champion, carried himself very well, especially after Cody Rhodes won the title a year earlier. And then Trevor Murdoch, of all people, ends his title reign, which is funny, random, all that. However, then they decided to give Tyrus, of all people, the belt. Tyrus in the year of 2022. You wouldn't hear Tyrus winning a title in the year of 2012 in its prime. Yet he won it here, and they were trying to spearhead him as the leader of a new era or something, which is absolutely ridiculous. I didn't even write a script for this part. I don't give a damn. I'm just going to say it. Tyrus was the worst thing that the NWA did in 2022, or ever, in recent years, of course. It was so bad because this guy, the only reason he held the title was because he was on Fox News. That's it. You take away Fox News, they won't even look in his direction, let alone even consider the possibility of him main eventing an NWA show, let alone winning the World Heavyweight Championship, a title that was won by the likes of Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Shane Douglas, freaking, I know his name doesn't stand out compared to those two, but still, it stands out compared to Tyrus. I'm just saying. And I know it's not the same NWA Championship, it's basically by name. It's not obviously the same title, you know, it doesn't have that same level of respect or history behind. Well, actually, it does have the history, but it doesn't have that same level of respect. It's just Tyrus, of all people, is ridiculous. He won the title, held it during Fox News, chilling there, and it was a nothing ring. Just the thought of Tyrus winning any world title in any promotion is crazy to me. And the craziest part in all of this about Tyrus, this guy held the title for about a year. Damn! And they didn't care. They didn't realize, hey, there's problems in the fact that it's Tyrus. No one's going to watch NWA. No one gives a damn about NWA in the year of 2022, 23, 24. None of that. It's unfortunate. It is what it is. But they probably thought to themselves, hey, there's more publicity for the title, which obviously didn't work out well, you know? But I find it funny how this guy almost held the title for a year. It's crazy to me. All right, those are the title reigns nobody asked for. I thought the video was a bit incomplete without those three, so I decided to end it here. Obviously, all these title reigns weren't bad. You know, Sheamus is one that stands out to me as one that, like, I do think Sheamus deserved it. He just didn't fit the role of the world champion at the time. I think if Sheamus won the title, like, 3 years later, I'd say, he probably would have had a better reign. It's just there's always going to be transitional and whatever. And again, I just want to mention, like, some of these wrestlers actually had good runs previously or afterwards. It's just in that time period or in that moment, you just start to think to yourself, why did this guy win the title? So yeah. Alright, that's title reigns nobody asked for. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit the bro kick on the like button and perhaps the cross arm breaker on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.